This mystery surrounds the story of a photograph that everyone seems to have seen, yet no one can find to this very day.
Bird, 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 but bird's a word.
Although not a flesh and blood creature, this photo is a cryptid unto itself. The Tombstone Thunderbird photograph. This photo in question comes from the 1800s and depicts a gigantic, dead, bird-like cryptid pinned onto the side of a barn with men lined up in front of it for scale. It has always been associated with the newspaper article, Found on the Desert, published April 26, 1890, in the Tombstone Epitaph, a frontier newspaper out of Arizona. The story reads as follows. A winged monster, resembling a huge alligator with an extremely elongated tail and an immense pair of wings, was found on the desert between the Whetstone and Wachusett Mountains last Sunday by two ranchers who were returning home. The creature was evidently greatly exhausted by a long flight, and when discovered was able to fly but a short distance at a time. After the first shock of wild amazement had passed, the two men, who were on horseback and armed with Winchester rifles, regained sufficient courage to pursue the monster, and after an exciting chase of several miles, succeeded in getting near enough to open fire with their rifles and wound it. The creature then turned on the men, but owing to its exhausted condition, they were able to keep out of its way, and after a few well-directed shots, the monster partly rolled over and remained motionless. The men cautiously approached, their horses frantic with terror, and found the creature was dead. They then proceeded to make an examination and found it measured about 92 feet in length, and the greatest diameter was about 50 inches. The monster had only 2 feet, these being situated a short distance in front of where the wings were joined to the body. The head, as near as they could judge, was about 8 feet long, the jaws being thickly set with strong, sharp teeth. Its eyes were as large as dinner plates and protruded about halfway from its head. Other newspapers at the time picked up this story, and it was recirculated for a while until the tale slowly faded away from time, replaced by other newsworthy events of the year. Horace Bell was one of the first to bring this story back to life in his 1930 book, On the Old West Coast. With his reprint of the Epitaph story, Bell never had mentioned a photograph, nor did he claim one existed. Bell told anecdotes in his book of the Elizabeth Lake Monster, a dragon-like amphibious beast that terrorized California ranchers for decades before it was seen departing the area and flying eastward. Bell stated confidently that this was the same monster killed 800 miles away on the desert outside Tombstone by the ranchers in the Epitaph article. The lost photo comes back around in 1963 in an issue of Saga magazine, where it was brought up and used as an example of a Thunderbird, the mythological Native American creature. The issue goes on to describe the photo taken that day in Tombstone as, the creature killed that day had been pinned to a wall with its wings spread out, and 6 men are in front for scale, arms out, touching fingertip to fingertip. This triggered a lot of people's recollections of this picture, the original one mentioned in his story. It seems to be after this issue, the photograph in question started being called the Tombstone Thunderbird when being referred back to. Everyone who knows this story knows the photo in question, but have you seen it? You might be thinking of some of the following photos. There was a Civil War reenactment photo that made the rounds as the original Tombstone Thunderbird photo. This picture was a fake created for a TV show called Freaky Links around 2001. Then there's the photo of men standing around a dead creature. But this photo was a manipulation from the original, which was a picture of a wounded train robber with the posse members who captured him in 1893. The original photo that everyone has seen yet nobody can find looks like this recreation shown here. People started to come forward after the publication of Saga in 1963. Ivan Sanderson, considered at the time a well-regarded researcher in strange phenomenon, claimed not only had he seen the picture, but had a copy of it, though lost after he had loaned it out to a friend. People back Sanderson's claim, saying they saw him display this picture on Canadian TV shows around this time. Mothman Prophecies author John Keel was certain he'd seen the photograph in a magazine. Another writer, H.M. Cranner, wrote in Fate magazine in the fall of 1963 that he remembers the picture and had been published in newspapers all over the country. There are thousands of people who have seen the original lost photo in books, magazines, and newspapers. They recall reading about it in books at the local library as a kid. It's almost like once seen, the image dissipates from whatever source it was first noticed in, never to be found again in that same media. People have done extensive research online of hoax photography, debunking the ones shown earlier and sharing stories of where the original photo they saw was for the first time. Countless people claim to have seen the same photo in various magazines published sometime during the 1960s or early 1970s, but no one can remember precisely where. The memories of this photo start around 1950 and continue through the early 80s. One main recollection surrounds the Mysteries of the Unexplained series from Reader's Digest. People remember the page 45. They remember being fascinated by this picture and showing family and friends, and now going back to their copies and finding it is no longer there, or is a recreation photo done from a retelling of the story. Mark Hall wrote in his book, Thunderbirds, America's Living Legends of Giant Birds, that he believes the description of the photo is so vivid that it has created a shared memory of something that never existed. Finding this lost photo has turned into a type of holy grail. Is it possible there isn't one? The Tombstone staff members in the 1960s went back and combed through the archives, noting that the original article was never printed with the photo. There were no subsequent follow-up articles at the time, and a source from the newspaper mentioned that back in the 1890s, the Epitaph was not even capable of publishing pictures with its articles. Was this whole story of the Tombstone Thunderbird a made-up fantasy of a bored reporter when nothing else was going on in town that day? Stories of giant flying creatures were reported in other newspapers at the time between 1881 to 1886, so this wasn't too out of the ordinary for a town to have a monster. Is this how Tombstone got theirs? A bored reporter runs a joke story and sets into motion a rolling boulder of a narrative that is still in motion to this very day. 133 years later, and we are still looking for this photo. If it never did exist, why do so many people remember seeing it? Is it a recollection of various images pieced together from people's collective subconscious, and indeed part of the mythology itself? Is the lost photo sitting in somebody's basement collecting dust in a folder somewhere? Or did we remember this photo to life? A mass collection of memory, bits and pieces of our recollection, all coming together to form the ultimate cryptid Mandela effect?